Inside Dachau, how U.S. troops reacted upon finding SS guards April 29, 1945, began like any other day at the end of the war. It was a Sunday morning. The weather was bleak. Low clouds covered the Bavarian sky, and the cold clung to everything it touched. Soldiers from the United States Army's 45th Infantry Division moved cautiously through southern Germany, advancing toward a large walled complex just outside Munich. They believed the objective was routine, possibly a storage facility or an industrial site supporting the German war effort. Nothing about their orders suggested anything unusual. What they were about to discover would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the column advanced, the soldiers encountered a railway line running alongside the compound. Parked on the tracks was a long freight train. Nearly 40 cattle cars stood still, sealed, silent. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then the smell reached them. It was heavy, unnatural, and unmistakable. One officer climbed up and slid open the door of a railcar to look inside. He recoiled in horror and screamed. The cars were filled with bodies, thousands of them. Men, women, and children lay packed together, lifeless, reduced to skin and bone. Many had died standing up. Others had collapsed on top of one another. These people had not been killed quickly. They had been abandoned, locked inside, and left to die slowly from starvation, dehydration, and exposure. Some corpses bore evidence of desperate acts. In the final stages of survival, the living had turned to the dead. The American soldiers were seasoned combat veterans. They had survived brutal fighting in Italy and France. They had seen towns destroyed and comrades killed in violent ways. Nothing they had experienced compared to this. One young soldier, only 19 years old, dropped to the ground and began sobbing uncontrollably. Another turned away and vomited. Others stood frozen, unable to speak. Shock gave way to fury. Not a loud, explosive anger, but a quiet, trembling rage that settled deep in the chest. From the tracks, the soldiers could see guard towers rising from the compound. SS positions were still occupied. Rifles were tightened in shaking hands. In that moment, battlefield rules ceased to exist. This is the story of what happened next, the reprisals at Dachau. The moment American soldiers lost control. The moment SS guards were executed. And the moment the highest levels of command chose silence over punishment. The men of the 45th Infantry Division were not executioners by nature. They were ordinary Americans, farmers, factory workers, students. Until that day, they were known for discipline and restraint. They accepted surrenders. They treated wounded enemies. They followed orders. Dachau erased all of that in minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks was the senior officer on the scene. He attempted to maintain control, ordering his troops forward and instructing them not to focus on the train. But it was impossible. More than 2,000 bodies lay inside those railcars. As the soldiers passed, the images burned themselves into memory: hollow faces, lifeless eyes, skeletal hands frozen in place. One infantryman later said the sight filled him with a desire to kill anyone responsible. At the main gate of the camp, resistance was minimal. The commandant, Martin Weiss, had already fled. Left behind was a junior SS officer, Heinrich Wicker, and several hundred SS guards. Wicker understood the situation. Germany had lost the war. He prepared to surrender. He dressed carefully in a clean uniform, polished his boots, and stepped forward carrying a white flag. He approached the Americans with confidence, expecting professional treatment. He formally announced the surrender of the camp. One American officer studied him, well-fed, neatly dressed, then looked past him toward the piles of corpses visible inside the camp. The officer spat in his face. As American troops entered Dachau, chaos erupted. Tens of thousands of prisoners realized liberation had arrived. Weak, skeletal survivors surged toward the fences, crying, laughing, and collapsing with relief. Some screamed the word, Americans, over and over again. But while the prisoners celebrated survival, the soldiers were searching for SS guards. Near a coal storage yard, a group of SS men attempted to surrender. They raised their hands and shouted phrases meant to signal the war was over. It made no difference. An American lieutenant, widely believed to be Jack Bushyhead, had moments earlier walked through the crematorium. The ovens still contained human remains. The air smelled of ash. He looked at the SS guards standing before him, alive, healthy, untouched. He gave no spoken command. Instead, he motioned with his weapon. The guards were ordered to stand against the wall. Roughly 50 men complied, confused at first, then terrified. Some shouted about international law. A machine gun was set up. The metallic sound of the weapon being readied echoed in the yard. The lieutenant nodded. The firing lasted only seconds. When it ended, the SS guards lay dead or dying in the snow. Blood mixed with coal dust beneath their bodies. Colonel Sparks heard the gunfire and ran toward the scene. Seeing soldiers continuing to fire, he drew his pistol and fired into the air, screaming for them to stop. One gunner looked back at him, crying, and said the guards had earned their fate. The violence did not end there. At another watchtower, SS guards attempted to descend with their hands raised. American soldiers shot them as they climbed down. Their bodies fell into the moat. The firing continued until no movement remained. A U.S. soldier later wrote that it did not feel like combat. It felt like punishment. Meanwhile, the prisoners themselves began taking revenge. Despite their weakness, survivors hunted down SS guards hiding throughout the camp. They had no firearms, only tools, sticks, and bare hands. American soldiers stood nearby, smoking and watching. When one officer questioned whether intervention was necessary, the response was simple: let it happen. For nearly an hour, Dachau existed without law. Victims became executioners. Justice was immediate and brutal. Eventually, order was restored. Colonel Sparks confined the remaining SS guards, not to punish them, but to protect them from further violence. But the events could not be hidden. Photographs captured American soldiers standing over executed SS guards. An investigation followed, led by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker. His report concluded that U.S. troops had violated international law and recommended courts-martial. The report reached General George S. Patton. Patton reviewed the evidence, the bodies, the train, the photographs. Known for strict discipline, he nevertheless rejected the conclusions. He argued that no soldier exposed to such horrors could be expected to behave normally. The investigation was halted. No charges were filed. General Eisenhower supported the decision, believing prosecutions would damage morale and ignore the reality of what the soldiers had witnessed. Lieutenant Jack Bushy had returned home after the war. He never spoke publicly about Dachau. Today, Dachau stands as a memorial to its victims. The prisoners are remembered. The SS guards who died that day are not. History has rendered its verdict. They created a system of cruelty, and when it collapsed, they faced its consequences. The question remains: was it murder, or justice? If you had seen that train, what choice would you have made? Share your thoughts in the comments, and for more World War II stories told with honesty and depth, follow WW2 Impact.